She spoke of a perfect match, a union of equals, a joining of two families of impeccable standing. We all saw the clips. We all heard the pride in Sahna's voice as she described the family of Sumit's first wife. It was painted as a fairy tale arrangement, a seamless merging of tradition, status, and destiny. But what if that pride was a mask? What if the fairy tale was a fabrication, a carefully constructed illusion designed to hide a devastating truth? A financial insider, a man who once balanced the books for Sumit's family, has come forward. And what he reveals is not a merger. It was a bailout. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to save the family name from the crushing weight of bankruptcy. This isn't just another recap. This is the story you were never meant to see, the secret that changes everything you thought you knew about Sumit, Jenny, and the unrelenting fury of his mother, Sahna. The truth we've uncovered is so explosive, it recontextualizes every fight, every tear, and every threat. If you want to understand the real story behind the 90-Day Fiance drama, the one buried beneath layers of family honor and tradition, then hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and ring the bell for notifications. Because we are about to pull back the curtain on Sahna's secret shame, and once you hear it, you will never see this family the same way again. To understand the depth of this secret, we must first go back. Not just to the beginning of Sumit and Jenny's story, but further back to a time before the cameras, before the internet romance, to a time when the Singh family's public image was their most valuable asset. In their community, they were seen as a pillar of respectability. Sumit's father, a businessman, was regarded as a man of substance, a provider who had built a comfortable life for his family through hard work and diligence. Sahna, as the matriarch, was the guardian of this image. She cultivated it, polished it, and presented it to the world with fierce pride. Their home was a symbol of their success, their social connections a testament to their standing. To the outside world, they were the embodiment of the stable, prosperous Indian family. Honor, reputation, and financial security were the three pillars upon which their entire world was built. And for years, those pillars seemed unshakable, but behind the closed doors of their respectable home, a storm was brewing. Our source, a former accountant for the family business who has requested anonymity for his own safety and professional standing, paints a chillingly different picture. He describes a slow, creeping decay that began years before Sumit ever met Jenny. The family business, once a source of immense pride and steady income, had fallen on hard times. It wasn't a single dramatic event, but a series of miscalculations and a failure to adapt to a changing economic landscape. Sumit's father, a man of a more traditional business mindset, made a series of risky investments in an attempt to expand, pouring capital into ventures that were fundamentally unsound. He was, our source says, trying to keep up appearances, to project an image of growth and modernity when, in reality, the foundation was crumbling. The global markets shifted, competition grew fiercer, and the business, IRSS, which had once thrived, began to bleed money. At first, it was manageable. They tightened their belts in private, putting on a brave face in public. But the losses began to compound. Debts mounted, loans that were once easily serviceable became crushing burdens. The accountant details late-night phone calls, not from family friends, but from aggressive creditors. He speaks of hushed, panicked conversations between Sahna and her husband, the sound of fear replacing the usual confident tones in their household. The pillar of financial security was not just shaking, it was beginning to pulverize into dust. They were leveraged to the hilt, with every asset tied up and the threat of public humiliation looming over them like a guillotine. This is the context that the television show never gave us. We see Sahna as a woman obsessed with tradition and social norms. But what if that obsession was a desperate shield? Her preoccupation with what the neighbors would say wasn't just about social pride. It was about financial survival. In their world, a public declaration of business failure, of bankruptcy, would be more than just embarrassing. It would be a social death sentence. It would mean losing everything: their home, their standing, their respect, and any hope of future credit or business opportunities. It was, in short, an unthinkable catastrophe. Sahna, the fierce protector of the family's image, was now facing the very real prospect of that image being shattered into a million pieces, revealing the stark poverty and failure it was designed to hide. The family was on a knife's edge, teetering on the brink of absolute ruin, and it was in this crucible of fear and desperation that a plan was forged. A plan that would not involve business loans or financial restructuring, but would instead leverage their only remaining untapped asset, their son, Sumit. The accountant describes this period as a time of quiet, intense strategy. The solution, he claims, was Sahna's brainchild, born from a primal need to save her family from the abyss. The plan was an arranged marriage, but this was to be no ordinary arrangement. They weren't looking for a suitable girl from a good family. They were looking for a lifeline. They were looking for a bailout. The search for Sumit's future wife became a covert financial operation. The criteria were not personality, compatibility, or even beauty. The sole overriding criterion was wealth. They needed a family so affluent, so established, that the dowry, or to use the more socially acceptable term, the gifts and blessings exchanged between families, would be substantial enough to not just host a lavish wedding, but to secretly erase the catastrophic debts that were threatening to swallow them whole. They were, in essence, shopping for a bride who could pay off their creditors. The marriage was not to be a sacred union, it was to be a clandestine business transaction. They found their perfect mark in the family of Sumit's first wife. Our source describes them as old money, a family with a sterling reputation and deep pockets. They were everything Sumit's family pretended to be, but for real. To this wealthy family, the union with the Singhs seemed like a respectable, if not particularly advantageous match. They saw a handsome young man from what they believed to be a stable, middle-class family. They had no idea they were the targets of a sophisticated financial rescue mission. They were not gaining a son-in-law. They were unknowingly funding a secret debt consolidation scheme. Sahna, according to the accountant, was the master manipulator in this entire affair. She presented her family as equals, speaking of shared values and a bright future for the young couple. Every meeting, every negotiation over the wedding details was a performance worthy of an award. She was charming, respectful, and utterly focused on her objective. The lavish wedding, which would later be a point of pride for her, was a crucial part of the illusion. It had to look like a celebration between two prosperous families, a grand display that would quell any rumors of financial trouble and cement their public image. The cost of the wedding was a calculated investment, a fraction of the massive influx of cash and assets they were about to receive. And what of Sumit in all of this? The narrative we've been sold is that he was a reluctant participant in a traditional arranged marriage. But this new information casts his reluctance in a far more tragic light. He wasn't just being forced into a loveless union, he was being used as human collateral. He was the product his parents were selling to save themselves. It's unlikely, our source believes, that Sumit knew the full extent of the financial desperation. To tell him the truth would have been too risky. It would have been admitting to their failure as parents, admitting that they were sacrificing his happiness for their own financial mistakes. So they likely framed it in terms of duty, tradition, and family honor. They would have pressured him, guilted him, and reminded him of his responsibilities as a son, all while hiding the terrifying reality that his marriage was the only thing standing between them and public disgrace. His resistance, his unhappiness, his quiet despair, all of which were visible even in the brief glimpses we got of his past, take on a new, profound meaning. It wasn't just the angst of a young man who wasn't ready for marriage. It was the subconscious rebellion of a soul that knew it was being sold. He was a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. His life was not his own, it was a bargaining chip, a transactional instrument used to settle his father's debts. The marriage wasn't a beginning for him. It was the closing of a deal that ensured his family's survival at the expense of his own freedom and future. The day the dowry was transferred must have been a day of immense, silent relief for Sahna and her husband. The accountant recalls how, in the weeks following the wedding, a series of large, outstanding debts were quietly and quickly settled. The creditors stopped calling. The immediate threat of bankruptcy receded. The storm had passed, and the illusion of their respectable life was, for the moment, secure. Sahna had done it. She had pulled her family back from the brink. The cost, of course, was her son's happiness, but in her mind, it was a necessary sacrifice. She had secured their survival, and in her worldview, the survival of the family unit and its reputation trumped the romantic desires of an individual. Sumit's first marriage wasn't a marriage at all. It was the most important financial transaction of his parents' lives. This context is the key that unlocks the entire mystery of Sahna's subsequent behavior. For years, this fragile secret arrangement held. Sumit played the part of the dutiful husband, living a double life, trapped in a gilded cage his parents had built around him. He was miserable, but he was compliant. The family's secret was safe. The creditors were paid. The public face of the Singh family remained intact. And then, like a bolt of lightning from a clear blue sky, came Jenny. From Sahna's perspective, Jenny wasn't just an inappropriate older American woman. She was a catastrophic, unforeseen variable that threatened to undo everything. She was a walking, talking liability. Jenny represented the one thing that could blow their entire scheme wide open: Sumit's genuine happiness and his desire for a life of his own choosing. His love for Jenny wasn't just a betrayal of his wife. It was a threat to the very foundation of his family's hard-won, secretly funded stability. Now rewatch every scene of Sahna's fury. See it through this new lens. Her rage is not the simple anger of a traditional mother who disapproves of her son's choice. It is the cold, abject terror of a CEO watching her most critical asset attempt to defect. Every tear she shed, every threat she made was not about preserving culture or tradition. It was about protecting her investment. It was about preventing the default on the loan that had saved them from ruin. When she screamed about the shame Sumit was bringing upon the family, she wasn't talking about the shame of him dating an older woman. She was talking about a much deeper, much more terrifying shame. The public exposure of their poverty, the shame of everyone discovering that their entire respectable life was a sham, funded by the family they had deceived. If Sumit left his wife for Jenny, the divorce would be messy. Questions would be asked. And in India, in a situation like this, it is not uncommon for the bride's family to demand the return of the dowry and gifts, especially in a case of abandonment or infidelity. This is the hidden terror behind Sahna's eyes. The divorce didn't just mean the end of a marriage, it meant the potential clawback of the bailout money. It meant the possibility of the old debts returning, of the creditors reappearing at their door. It meant the entire house of cards she had so carefully constructed would come crashing down. Sumit wasn't just breaking her heart. He was threatening to plunge the entire family back into the financial abyss she had sacrificed him to escape. Her fight to keep Sumit in his first marriage was never about love, or even about his wife. It was a desperate, frantic battle to prevent a financial apocalypse. Think about her visceral, almost physical rejection of Jenny. It had nothing to do with Jenny as a person. Jenny could have been a saint, a billionaire, a Nobel laureate. It wouldn't have mattered. The only thing that mattered was that she wasn't the woman whose family's money was keeping the Singhs afloat. Jenny, in her ignorance, was a human-shaped wrecking ball, poised to smash through the fragile wall of their financial secrecy. Sahna's opposition was not personal. It was purely business. She was trying to eliminate a hostile threat to her family's solvency. This theory also explains the seemingly irrational level of her emotional outbursts. Viewers have often wondered why she was so unbelievably distraught, why she would threaten suicide, why she would disown her son with such venom. Was it really just about age and nationality, or was it the sheer panic of a person watching their darkest secret, their most profound failure, about to be dragged into the light for the whole world to see? She wasn't just losing a son to a foreign woman. She was facing the complete and utter destruction of her life's work, the preservation of her family's honor, an honor that she knew was built on a foundation of lies and financial desperation. The family meetings, the endless arguments, the circular conversations, they were all negotiations. Sahna and her husband were not trying to understand their son's feelings. They were trying to manage a crisis, to bring a rogue asset back under control. When they spoke of duty, they meant his duty to uphold the financial agreement they had made on his behalf. When they spoke of society, they meant the society of creditors and peers who would ostracize them if the truth of their bankruptcy was revealed. They were speaking in a code that Sumit and the audience could not understand. We heard the words honor, respect, and tradition, but the hidden subtext, the real message, was debt, poverty, and ruin. Consider the immense pressure they placed on Sumit. For years, he was trapped, catfishing Jenny because he couldn't see a way out. We viewed this as weakness, as deceit born from a fear of confrontation. But imagine the weight he was actually carrying. He was not just afraid of his parents' disapproval. He was likely sensing, on a deep, intuitive level, that his actions had consequences far beyond a simple family argument. He was the linchpin holding a terrible secret in place. His compliance was the glue that kept his family's world from falling apart. His attempts to please everyone, his parents, his wife, Jenny, were the frantic actions of a man trying to prevent an explosion without even knowing what the bomb was made of. The divorce, when it finally happened, must have been Sahna's worst nightmare come to life. The process was drawn out, difficult, and expensive. And according to our source, her greatest fear was realized. The first wife's family, feeling betrayed and humiliated, began to demand retribution. This wasn't just about getting their daughter out of a bad situation. It was about reclaiming what was theirs. The discussions were no longer about marital discord. They were about assets, about the return of gifts, about financial compensation for the damage done to their family's name. This is why Sana's acceptance of Jenny has always felt so forced, so fragile. It wasn't a change of heart. It was a strategic retreat. After the divorce was finalized, after a settlement was likely reached that plunged them back into a precarious financial state, the original crisis had passed. The secret bailout was now a sunk cost. The immediate threat of the first wife's family exposing them was neutralized, albeit at a great financial price. At this point, continuing to fight Sumit's marriage to Jenny served no further financial purpose. The damage was done. Her acceptance was not about love or understanding. It was the reluctant pragmatism of a defeated general. She had lost the war to keep the original financial arrangement intact. Now she had to deal with the new reality. Her continued coldness, her refusal to fully embrace Jenny, is the lingering bitterness of that defeat. Every time she looks at Jenny, she doesn't just see the woman who stole her son. She sees the living embodiment of her family's financial downfall. She sees the catalyst that forced their most shameful secret into the light of day, even if only within the closed-door negotiations of the divorce. Jenny is a constant reminder of the control she lost, of the carefully constructed world that came crashing down. Her resentment is not personal, it is financial. It is the anger of someone who made a desperate gamble, won for a time, and then lost it all because of a factor she could never have predicted: her son's genuine love for someone else. This brings us to the ultimate reckoning, the final piece of the puzzle: Sumit. The show has framed his journey as one of liberation, of finally standing up to his parents and choosing his own happiness. But the true liberation may be a truth he has yet to fully comprehend. The final act of this hidden drama is the moment Sumit realizes that his entire first marriage was nothing more than a business transaction designed to save his parents from the consequences of their own failures. He wasn't a husband in that first marriage, he was collateral. He wasn't a son making a traditional choice. He was a financial instrument being leveraged. Imagine the devastating clarity that would come with that realization. The years of guilt he carried for betraying his first wife, for lying to Jenny, for disobeying his parents, all of it would be reframed. How can you be guilty of ruining a sacred marriage when the marriage was never sacred to begin with? How can you feel shame for betraying your parents' trust when they betrayed you on the most fundamental level, selling your future to pay for their past? His parents didn't sacrifice for him, they sacrificed him for themselves. His happiness was never a factor in their equation. His life was a line item on a balance sheet, a debt to be paid. Their anger at him was never about his choices for his own life. It was about his disruption of their financial portfolio. This truth, as painful as it would be to first confront, would ultimately be the thing that sets him truly free. It would sever the final threads of guilt and obligation that have bound him for his entire adult life. He would see that his parents' love was conditional, predicated on his utility to their financial survival. He would realize that he didn't destroy his family's honor when he chose Jenny. His parents destroyed their own honor years earlier when they chose to deceive a wealthy family and sell their own son to cover their debts. The shame he was made to feel was never his own, it was theirs. And they had projected it onto him, making him carry the burden of their own failures. The moment Sumit understands this, he is no longer a disobedient son. He is a survivor of a deeply cynical and exploitative family dynamic. He is a man who, against all odds, managed to find love and freedom despite being treated as a commodity. This insider report reframes the entire narrative. Sahna is not a traditionalist matriarch. She is a desperate and manipulative financial strategist, driven by the terror of poverty and public shame. Sumit is not just a man torn between love and duty, he is the unwitting collateral in a secret family bailout. And Jenny is not a homewrecker. She is the accidental whistleblower whose very existence threatened to expose a decade-long conspiracy of financial desperation. The story isn't about tradition versus modernity. It's about a secret debt, a transactional marriage, and the son who was sold to keep his family from bankruptcy. The real drama was never about who Sumit would choose. It was about whether Sahna's secret, shameful investment would pay off. And in the end, her greatest fear came true. Her son defaulted, not on a marriage, but on the loan that saved their family, and the consequences of that default are what we've been watching on our screens all along. Let's delve deeper into the mechanics of this deception, into the psychological warfare Sahna waged not just on Jenny, but on her own son. For this entire arrangement to work, for Sumit to remain a compliant asset, he had to be kept in a state of perpetual obligation. The currency of this control was guilt. Every argument, every tearful plea from his mother was a carefully calibrated deposit into his emotional debt account. She reminded him of the sacrifices she made as a mother, the sleepless nights, the endless work to provide him with a good life. We, the audience, saw this as typical parental guilt tripping, but it was far more sinister. It was a CEO reminding an employee of all the company has done for them, just before asking them to do something unethical for the good of the firm. The good of the family was her constant refrain. It was the banner under which she justified every manipulation. But what was the good of the family? It wasn't their emotional well-being. It wasn't Sumit's happiness. It was the preservation of their financial solvency and the public image that protected it. The family she was protecting was not a collection of loved ones, it was a business entity on the verge of collapse. Sumit's duty was not to a loving mother, but to a desperate board chairman. His personal desires were irrelevant, written off as emotional frivolities that threatened the bottom line. This is why his love for Jenny seemed so incomprehensible to her. It was like a factory worker suddenly declaring he was in love with a piece of machinery and refusing to operate any other. It didn't compute within her purely transactional framework. Let's re-examine one of the most explosive moments in the entire saga, the confrontation. The moment when the first wife's family storms the apartment, corners Sumit, and the whole world comes crashing down. On screen, it looked like the righteous fury of a betrayed family. But with our new understanding, it was something else entirely. This wasn't just a family intervention, it was a delegation of angry investors confronting a fraudulent CEO. Their rage was not just about infidelity, it was about the shocking realization that they had been systematically deceived. They had invested their daughter, their name, and a significant amount of capital into what they believed was a respectable family, only to discover it was a sinking ship. The patriarch of that family, when he pointed his finger at Sumit, wasn't just an angry father-in-law. He was a man who understood he had been played. He was likely a shrewd businessman himself, and the pieces would have started clicking into place. The suddenness of the marriage, the Singh family's eagerness, the opacity of their own business dealings, it all would have begun to smell foul. His anger was the anger of a man who had been conned. He wasn't just there to reclaim his daughter's honor. He was there to assess the damage to his portfolio. The threats of police and legal action were not just about the marital laws. They were about the potential for pressing charges related to dowry fraud and financial misrepresentation. This is a very real, very serious crime. And where were Sahna and her husband at this moment? They were not defending their son from an unfair attack. They were in damage control mode. Their primary objective was to de-escalate the situation, not to protect Sumit's well-being, but to prevent their creditors from going public. They needed to contain the fallout, to stop this from escalating into a full-blown financial investigation that would expose everything. Their frantic attempts to placate the other family were not born of shame for their son's actions, but of sheer terror that the terms of their secret deal were about to be revealed in the ugliest way possible. Sumit was on his own, a scapegoat thrown to the wolves to distract from the much larger crime his parents had committed. This leads us to the divorce settlement. Sumit mentioned a figure, around $20,000 that he had to pay to be free. At the time, it seemed like an exorbitant amount for a simple divorce, especially for a man who seemed to have little personal wealth. We were led to believe this was alimony or some form of punitive settlement for his infidelity. But it is far more likely that this figure was a negotiated clawback. It was the first wife's family reclaiming a portion of their initial investment. It was a settlement to buy their silence, a financial parachute that allowed the Singhs to escape a full-blown fraud accusation. That $20,000 was likely every penny Sumit and his family could scrape together to put this disaster behind them and, most importantly, to prevent a legal process that would have put their financial history under a microscope. Sahna's relentless campaign to get Sumit to return to his wife, even after the affair was exposed, now makes perfect sense. It wasn't about him fixing his marriage. It was about him salvaging the deal. If he could just go back, if he could just pretend, they could avoid the financial penalty. They could avoid the clawback. Her pleas for him to do the right thing were pleas for him to continue the charade that was keeping them solvent. She had already sold him once. She was now demanding that he stay sold. When he refused, when he chose freedom at the cost of that $20,000 settlement, he was, in her eyes, personally bankrupting the family for a second time. First his father's business failures, now his own romantic rebellion. From her perspective, her son was as financially irresponsible as her husband, and she was the one left to clean up the mess. Now, let's consider the other players in this drama. What about Sumit's brother, Amit, and his wife? Their position has always been one of cautious disapproval, siding with their parents but without the same level of volcanic rage. This, too, can be explained by financial theory. Amit, being the other son, would have been acutely aware of the family's financial standing. It's highly probable that he was in on the secret. He understood the stakes. His support for his parents was not about tradition, it was about familial self-preservation. He knew that if the family went bankrupt, his own financial future would be impacted. He had a wife and child to think about. Amit's calm, logical arguments against Jenny were the arguments of a business partner trying to talk sense into a rogue executive. He wasn't appealing to Sumit's heart, he was appealing to his sense of financial duty. His frustration was that of a man watching his brother make a decision that would negatively affect the family's collective stock value. He and his wife were beneficiaries of the stability that Sumit's first marriage provided. Their comfortable life was, in part, subsidized by that dowry. Jenny's arrival didn't just threaten Sumit's life, it threatened theirs as well. They were all complicit in the scheme, willing participants in the sacrifice of their brother for the greater financial good of the Singh family corporation. Their disapproval of Jenny was not a moral judgment, it was a risk assessment, and Jenny was a high-risk liability. But the most tragic figure in this entire sordid affair is not Sumit. And it is not Jenny. It is the one person we barely saw, the one person whose pain was used as a backdrop for the drama, Sumit's first wife. We have been conditioned to see her as the obstacle, the faceless wife that Sumit was trapped with. But if this theory is true, she is the primary victim of a massive calculated fraud. She entered a marriage in good faith, believing she was starting a life with a man from a respectable family. She brought with her not just her hopes and dreams, but the wealth and reputation of her own family. And it was all a lie. She wasn't just married to a man who was secretly in love with someone else. She was married to a man whose family had targeted hers for their money. Her entire life, her future, was an illusion constructed to solve a debt problem she knew nothing about. The home she entered was not built on love or respect, but on her family's money. She was not a wife. She was a solution. She was an angel investor who was never told the company was failing. The humiliation she must have felt upon discovering Sumit's affair is only one layer of her pain. Imagine the deeper, more profound betrayal of realizing that the entire foundation of her marriage was a cynical business transaction. Her husband wasn't the only one who had betrayed her. Her in-laws, the people who were supposed to become her second family, had been deceiving her from the very beginning. They didn't welcome her as a daughter. They liquidated her as an asset. Her family's rage was not just justified, it was an understatement. They had been swindled. They had been lured into a trap by a family pretending to be their equals, all while secretly using their wealth to pay off hidden debts. The marriage was a sham, the wedding a piece of theater, and their daughter a pawn. The pain and anger we saw in that confrontation was likely just the tip of the iceberg. The real conversations, the ones that happened behind closed doors with lawyers and accountants, must have been filled with accusations of deception and fraud. The story of Sumit and Jenny has completely erased her from the narrative, reducing her to a plot device. But in this truer, darker version of the story, she is the moral center. She is the innocent party who was exploited by a desperate family, and her story is the one that has been most deliberately buried. This brings us back to Jenny. For years, she was painted as naive, as foolish, as a woman who refused to see the red flags. But in this context, her persistence takes on a heroic quality. She was the one variable Sahna could not control. She was the force of chaos that shattered the carefully constructed lie. Her love for Sumit, as genuine and unwavering as it was, acted as a truth serum. Without her, Sumit might have remained in that loveless, transactional marriage for the rest of his life, a prisoner of his parents' financial secrets. He would have lived and died as collateral, never knowing the freedom of a life chosen for himself. Jenny's refusal to give up, her willingness to endure years of insults, exile, and uncertainty was not just the act of a woman in love. It was, unintentionally, an act of liberation for Sumit. She provided him with an alternative, a vision of a life where he could be more than just a solution to his parents' problems. Every time Sahna tried to push her away, she was trying to shove the truth back into the closet. Every insult hurled at Jenny was an attempt to devalue the one thing that threatened their scheme: genuine, non-transactional love. Jenny didn't just steal Sahna's son, she exposed the bankruptcy at the heart of the Singh family. And it wasn't just financial, it was a moral and emotional bankruptcy as well. So where does this leave them now? The secret is out, at least in the sense that the financial arrangement has collapsed. The divorce settlement was paid, the first wife is gone, and Sumit and Jenny are married. Sahna has offered a grudging, paper-thin acceptance. But the damage is done, and the dynamics are forever changed. The relationship between Sumit and his parents can never be one of genuine love and respect again, not if he knows the truth. Because he would have to accept that every "I love you," every piece of parental advice, every demand for respect he ever heard was potentially tainted by this overarching financial desperation. He has to look at his mother and see not just a parent who disapproves of his wife, but a woman who is willing to sell his entire future to save herself. He has to look at his father and see a man whose business failures led directly to his son being used as a bargaining chip. This knowledge changes everything. It retroactively poisons every memory. It explains every mystery. It is a burden, but it is also a powerful shield. No longer can his parents manipulate him with guilt over tradition or family honor, because he knows their definition of honor is rooted in financial solvency, not integrity. He is free from their control because he now understands the nature of that control. It was never about love, it was about leverage. And so the story we watched for years was a shadow play. We saw the puppets, but we never saw the masters pulling the strings, nor did we understand the nature of the strings themselves. They were not strings of tradition or family duty, but financial chains. The drama was not a clash of cultures, but the slow, agonizing default of a secret human-powered loan. Sahna's pride was indeed a cover for a family's poverty. Her rage was the terror of exposure. And Sumit's long journey was not just about finding love, it was about unknowingly escaping a life sentence as the collateral for his parents' mistakes. This secret really does change the entire story. It elevates it from a messy reality TV romance to a modern-day tragedy about family, debt, and deception. It forces us to reevaluate every character, every motive, and every tear. And it leaves us with the ultimate question, the one that lies at the heart of this entire saga. Now that we have seen behind the curtain, now that we understand the devastating truth of the financial bailout that was Sumit's first marriage, who do you truly feel is the biggest victim in this scenario? Is it Sumit, the son who was sold, his happiness sacrificed for his parents' financial security? Is it his first wife, the innocent woman whose family was deceived and whose life was built on a foundation of lies? Or is it Jenny, the outsider who endured years of torment, unknowingly fighting a battle against a secret financial conspiracy she could never have imagined? The lines are blurred, the guilt is shared, and the answer is far from simple. Let's discuss.